The Watcher in the Woods. I never thought I'd end up in the middle of nowhere, but here I was, driving through an endless stretch of forest with only the fading sunlight to guide me. My friends had dared me to take a road trip, and after a few too many drinks, I'd agreed. A cabin in the woods sounded like a great escape. As dusk settled in, the trees loomed closer, their gnarled branches twisting like skeletal fingers. I turned off the main road, my GPS directing me down a narrow dirt path. The shadows grew longer, and an unsettling feeling crept in. It wasn't just the isolation, it felt like I was being watched. When I arrived at the cabin, the air was thick with an eerie silence. The place looked ancient, weathered by time and neglect. The door creaked ominously as I stepped inside. Dust motes floated in the dim light filtering through the grimy windows. I tossed my bag on the table and lit a lantern, hoping to dispel the growing sense of dread. That night, as I sat by the flickering light, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I heard rustling outside, faint but persistent. I chalked it up to animals and tried to distract myself with a book, but my eyes kept darting to the window. The shadows danced in a flickering glow, and the woods outside seemed alive with whispers. Sleep eluded me. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the night. Then came the tapping, soft but distinct. It was coming from the window. My heart raced as I turned toward it. I convinced myself it was just a branch or perhaps a trick of the wind. But as I peered into the darkness, I froze. There, just at the edge of the trees, stood a figure. My breath caught in my throat. It was too far away to see clearly, but I could make out a hunched silhouette, swaying gently as if it were breathing. I blinked, and it vanished. I told myself it was a figment of my imagination. The isolation was getting to me. I forced myself to sleep, but dreams of that figure haunted me, its eyes wide and empty, the faintest hint of a smile curling on its lips. Morning light poured through the windows, chasing away the shadows. I stepped outside, eager to shake off the night's terror. The woods felt different in daylight, inviting but still a little too quiet. I decided to explore, hoping to find a distraction. As I walked deeper into the forest, I stumbled upon an old, dilapidated shack, half hidden by overgrown weeds. Curious, I pushed the door open, its rusted hinges screaming in protest. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of decay. Old furniture lay scattered about, remnants of a life long forgotten. I found a dusty journal on a table, its pages yellowed and brittle. Flipping through it, I discovered entries from a man who had lived there decades ago. He wrote of a presence in the woods, a watcher that would follow him, lurking just beyond the trees. His final entry was a desperate plea for help, mentioning something about the watcher's eyes, how they could ensnare a soul. Chills ran down my spine. The journal fell from my hands as I felt that familiar prickling sensation on the back of my neck. I turned slowly, heart pounding. There it was again, standing at the edge of the clearing, that same figure just watching me. This time I could see its face, pale and gaunt, with hollow eyes that seemed to pull at my very essence. Fear surged through me and I ran. Branches whipped at my arms and legs as I sprinted back toward the cabin, the sound of footsteps echoing behind me. I didn't dare look back. I burst through the door and slammed it shut, locking it with trembling hands. I could hear it outside now, a low whisper that seemed to seep through the walls. Come out, come out. Desperate, I barricaded the door and huddled in a corner, clutching the journal. Hours passed, or maybe just minutes. Time felt distorted. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. Then silence. When I finally dared to peek outside, the world was cloaked in darkness once more. The figure was gone, but the unease remained. I didn't sleep that night. I sat, wide-eyed, clutching the journal as if it could offer protection. In the morning, I packed my things, ready to flee this nightmare. As I drove back down the dirt path, I glanced into the rearview mirror. For just a split second, I saw it, the watcher, standing at the edge of the forest, its hollow eyes fixed on me, a twisted smile stretching across its face. I never returned to that cabin, but sometimes, when the woods are silent, I still feel its gaze upon me, waiting, watching, hungry for the next lost soul. The house at the end of the road. The road stretched endlessly, bordered by thick woods that seemed to close in around me. I'd taken a wrong turn during a late-night drive, searching for a shortcut to my friend's cabin. Instead, I found myself in the middle of nowhere, with only my GPS to guide me. It was late, far too late to be wandering alone. The sun had set hours ago, leaving me with only my car's headlights to pierce the darkness. Just when I began to lose hope of finding my way, I spotted a flicker of light in the distance. Curiosity piqued. I'd followed the light, my tires crunching on gravel as I approached an old, dilapidated house. The windows were dark, but a warm glow pulsed from the inside. I parked and stepped out, the chill of the night air biting at my skin. As I walked toward the house, I felt an inexplicable sense of dread wash over me. The porch creaked underfoot, the wood warped and splintered. I knocked on the door, half hoping someone might be inside to help me. The door swung open with a slow creak, revealing a dimly lit hallway. No one stood there, but the air felt charged, as if the house itself was waiting for me to enter. I hesitated but stepped inside, the door closing ominously behind me. "Hello," I called, my voice echoing against the walls. No answer. The glow I had seen came from a small room at the end of the hall. I ventured forward, each step heavy with anticipation. When I reached the doorway, I found an old living room filled with dusty furniture and a flickering fireplace. It was cozy in a way, but the unsettling feeling remained. In the corner, a small radio crackled to life, playing a soft tune that only heightened my unease. I scanned the room and noticed photographs lining the mantel. Faces stared back at me, smiling families, children playing, a couple in love. But something was off. Their smiles seemed forced, almost unnatural. A shiver ran down my spine as I studied one picture closely. It was a family I recognized from my hometown, missing for over a year. Panic surged through me. I turned to leave, but the door I had entered through was now gone. The walls seemed to shift, trapping me inside this strange place. I rushed to the windows, but they were boarded up, blocking any chance of escape. "Help!" I shouted, but my voice felt swallowed by the oppressive silence. As I turned back to the room, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. In the shadows, a figure stood watching me, its features indistinguishable in the low light. "Welcome," it whispered, its voice barely more than a breath. "You've come to stay." I backed away, heart pounding, as the figure stepped into the light. It was a woman, her face pale and gaunt, eyes sunken deep. "We've been waiting for someone like you," she said, a smile spreading across her lips. Desperate, I turned to run, but more figures emerged from the shadows, all wearing the same eerie smile. They reached out, their fingers brushing against me, cold as death. "Stay with us," they murmured in unison, their voices a haunting chorus. I screamed, adrenaline coursing through me as I'd fought my way through the throng, desperate for freedom. I pushed past them and stumbled back into the hallway. But as I ran, the walls warped and twisted, leading me in circles. Finally, I burst through a door that opened to a dark staircase leading down. I had no choice. I descended into the abyss, hoping to find an escape. The air grew thick and stale, a musty smell wrapping around me like a shroud. At the bottom, I found myself in a basement cluttered with old furniture and boxes. I searched frantically, but it was hopeless. The exit eluded me. Then, I spotted a small window near the ceiling. With all my strength, I pushed a nearby shelf over and climbed on top. I reached for the window, just as I heard them coming. The whispers grew louder, echoing in my mind as I pulled myself up. I felt cold hands grasping at my ankles, trying to pull me down. I screamed, shoving my body through the opening, scraping my skin against the rough edges. With one final push, I tumbled out into the night, rolling onto the damp grass outside. I gasped for air, adrenaline surging as I scrambled to my feet. I ran blindly into the woods, not stopping until I could no longer hear their whispers. I finally reached the main road and flagged down a passing car, desperate for escape. As I glanced back, the house loomed in the distance, dark and foreboding. I never returned to that road, but I still hear the whispers in my dreams. They call out to me, beckoning me back to the house at the end of the road, where the lost souls wait for another to join them. The shadow in the fields. I grew up in a small, isolated town surrounded by vast fields and thick woods. It was a place where the nights were quiet, and the only sounds were the wind rustling through the tall grass and the occasional hoot of an owl. One summer evening, with boredom creeping in, I decided to take a walk through the fields that bordered my family's property. As I wandered deeper into the expanse, the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. The shadows lengthened, and an uneasy feeling crept over me. It was a sensation I couldn't shake, a nagging feeling that I was being watched. I tried to brush it off, convincing myself it was just my imagination. Suddenly, I noticed something unusual in the distance. A figure stood at the edge of the field, shrouded in shadow. It was tall and thin, but the shape was indistinct, as if it were made of darkness itself. My heart raced as I squinted to get a better look, but just as quickly as it appeared, the figure vanished behind a row of corn stalks. Curiosity got the better of me. I moved closer, my pulse quickening with each step. The air grew colder, and an oppressive silence descended. As I reached the edge of the cornfield, I felt a chill wash over me, as if the temperature had dropped suddenly. "Hello," I called out, my voice trembling. No response. I peered into the rows of corn, the tall plants swaying gently in the breeze. Something deep inside warned me to turn back, but I pushed forward, drawn by an inexplicable pull. As I stepped into the field, the atmosphere changed. It felt heavy, as if the air itself was thickening. The corn rustled around me, and I sensed movement just beyond my line of sight. I called out again, but this time I was met with silence. Then I saw it again, the figure, now closer, standing between the stalks. It looked like a person but had no discernible features, just a black silhouette that seemed to absorb the fading light around it. Panic surged through me, and I turned to flee. But as I ran, the world twisted. The rows of corn morphed into an endless maze, and I could no longer tell which direction led back to safety. I felt it behind me, moving swiftly, effortlessly, as if gliding just above the ground. I screamed, heart pounding, as I stumbled through the field, desperate for escape. The figure was gaining on me, its presence cold and suffocating. I didn't dare look back. I just pushed forward, praying for a way out. Then, in my frantic escape, I tripped and fell, hitting the ground hard. I looked up, breathless and terrified, and there it was, hovering just a few feet away. It loomed over me, the darkness swirling like a storm. I could feel its gaze piercing into me, hollow and hungry. I scrambled to my feet, adrenaline coursing through my veins, and ran in a random direction. But the cornfield seemed to close in around me, and the whispers began, soft, chilling murmurs that echoed through the air. "Stay, join us." Just as despair began to settle in, I spotted a break in the rows. I pushed through the stalks and burst into the open field beyond, collapsing on the ground. I looked back, panting, and saw the figure at the edge of the cornfield, watching me, unmoving. The moon illuminated the space around me, casting an eerie glow, and as I glanced up, I realized the figure was slowly fading, merging back into the shadows of the field. I scrambled to my feet and ran, not stopping until I reached the safety of my home. That night, I locked every door and shuttered every window, terrified that the darkness would come creeping in. But I could still hear those whispers echoing in my mind. Weeks passed, and I avoided the fields. But every night, I dreamt of that shadow, its presence a constant reminder of the terror I had faced. I knew I could never return to those fields, not while the shadow lingered, waiting for the next moment of weakness to draw me back into its embrace. The cabin beneath the pines. It was supposed to be a relaxing getaway. My friends and I rented a remote cabin deep in the woods, surrounded by towering pines and the soothing sounds of nature. We arrived just before sunset, the golden light filtering through the branches. The place seemed perfect, rustic, charming, and secluded. As night fell, we gathered around the fire pit outside, laughing and sharing stories. But as the flames danced, an unsettling feeling settled over me. I noticed that the woods were unusually quiet. The usual sounds of crickets and rustling leaves were absent, replaced by an oppressive silence that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Later, after a few drinks, we decided to explore the area. Armed with flashlights, we wandered into the woods, our laughter echoing through the trees. As we ventured deeper, I spotted an old path, overgrown and barely visible. My curiosity got the better of me, and I led the group down the path, excited by the prospect of an adventure. The trees closed in around us, the air thick with a musty scent. After a while, we stumbled upon an old cabin, hidden beneath a thick blanket of pine needles and vines. Its windows were shattered, and the door hung askew on its hinges. "Should we go in?" Jenna asked, her voice laced with trepidation. Why not? It'll be fun, I replied, trying to mask my own unease. We stepped inside, our flashlights cutting through the darkness. Dust motes danced in the beams of light, and the air was stale. The interior was a mess, furniture overturned, broken glass littering the floor, but something felt off. The walls seemed to absorb the light, making the cabin feel claustrophobic. Let's take a look upstairs, Mark suggested, already climbing the rickety staircase. I hesitated but followed. As we reached the top, I noticed strange markings on the walls, symbols etched into the wood, dark and ominous. My heart raced, and I felt a cold draft sweep through the room. Guys, I think we should head back, I said, unease flooding my voice. But they were already exploring. I could hear them laughing and joking, but the sound felt distant, echoing in my mind. I took a step back, my instincts screaming that we should leave. Suddenly, a loud crash came from downstairs. We all froze, the laughter dying in our throats. What was that? Jenna whispered, wide-eyed. I don't know, I replied, my heart pounding. Let's go check it out. We descended the stairs, the air growing colder with each step. As we reached the bottom, we found the front door swinging open. I glanced outside, but the darkness swallowed everything beyond the threshold. Maybe it was just the wind, Mark said, trying to sound brave. But I wasn't convinced. Just then, a strange sound echoed from the back of the cabin, a soft, mournful wail that chilled me to the bone. Did you hear that? I asked, voice trembling. Before anyone could respond, a shadow moved in the corner of my vision. I turned, and there it was. A dark figure standing just outside the window, its features indistinct, but its presence unmistakably malevolent. Get out, I screamed, adrenaline surging through me. We rushed toward the door, but it slammed shut with a force that rattled the walls. Panic set in. I yanked on the handle, but it wouldn't budge. The figure outside was now pressing against the glass, its face twisted and grotesque. Its eyes glowed with an otherworldly light, and its mouth stretched into a wide, sinister grin. You shouldn't have come here, it hissed, the sound like nails on a chalkboard. We stumbled back, terror coursing through our veins. The symbols on the walls began to glow faintly, illuminating the room with a sickly light. We need to find another way out, I shouted, my voice breaking. We dashed toward the back of the cabin, searching for a window. The air felt thick and suffocating, and the wailing grew louder, echoing off the walls. I spotted a small window in a back room and scrambled toward it. Help me, I yelled, pushing against the frame. Mark and Jenna joined me, and together we managed to pry it open just wide enough to escape. As I climbed through, I felt a cold hand brush against my ankle, sending me tumbling outside. I scrambled to my feet, breathless, and looked back just in time to see the figure looming in the window, its eyes locked on me, hunger radiating from its twisted form. Run! I screamed, and we took off into the woods, branches clawing at our skin as we ran blindly through the darkness. The wailing followed us, echoing through the trees, a haunting reminder of the terror we'd encountered. When we finally reached the safety of our cabin, we collapsed on the porch, gasping for breath. We locked every door and shuttered every window, but the feeling of being watched lingered. That night, I lay awake to the silence outside, but the wailing never left my mind. We left the next morning, vowing never to speak of that cabin again. The Last Collar. It was a Friday night, the kind where the silence wraps around you like a thick fog. Living in the middle of nowhere has its advantages: starlit skies, peace, and solitude. But tonight, something felt off. I was scrolling through my phone, the only light in the dimly lit room. My small cabin was miles away from the nearest neighbor, a comforting isolation that now seemed oppressive. As the clock struck midnight, my phone buzzed. A call from an unknown number. I hesitated. Usually, I let unknown numbers go to voicemail, but a nagging curiosity tugged at me. "Hello," I said, forcing my voice to remain steady. Silence. Then a whisper, barely audible. "Help me." "Who is this?" My heart raced. I glanced around the room, half expecting to see someone standing outside the window. The night was dark, and the trees pressed against the glass like skeletal hands. "Please, I'm lost. I can't see." The voice was shaky, trembling with fear. "Where are you?" I asked, my mind racing. It sounded like a woman. "Alone in the woods." My instincts screamed at me to hang up, but I felt a pull to help her. I don't know, it's so dark. They're coming for me. Who's coming? I pressed, adrenaline coursing through my veins. But before she could answer, the line went dead. I stared at my phone, heart pounding. Was it a prank? I tried calling back, but it went straight to voicemail. I got up, pacing the small living room, the weight of the night pressing down on me. Then I heard it, a rustling outside. My breath hitched in my throat as I moved cautiously toward the window. Peering out, I saw nothing but shadows. My mind raced. What if she really was out there? What if she needed help? Against my better judgment, I grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside. The night air was chilling, and the forest loomed ominously around me. Each crunch of leaves beneath my feet echoed in the stillness. I called out, "Hello, is anyone there?" No answer, just the whispering trees swaying in the wind. I moved deeper into the woods, my flashlight beam slicing through the darkness. The oppressive silence felt alive, pressing in on me. And then I heard it, a soft sob, barely audible. "Hello." I called again, following the sound. It led me deeper, further from my cabin. The beam of my flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows that danced around me. The sobbing grew louder, more desperate. I finally stumbled into a small clearing, and there she was, a figure huddled against a tree. Her hair hung in tangled strands, her clothes torn and dirty. I could see her face, pale and streaked with tears. "I thought you'd never come," she gasped. "Are you okay?" I rushed to her side, the overwhelming urge to help. "What happened?" I was running from them," she choked out. "I didn't know where to go. I thought they'd catch me." "Who?" I asked, scanning the darkness around us, feeling an instinctive urge to protect her. Suddenly, her expression changed. Her eyes widened in horror as she whispered, "They're here." Before I could ask who she meant, I felt it, a presence, something cold and sinister creeping up behind me. I turned, flashlight beam shaking, and saw them, dark figures emerging from the shadows, their eyes glinting like predatory animals. "Run." I screamed, grabbing her hand, pulling her toward the safety of the trees. But she just stood there, frozen, her gaze fixed behind me. "You can't help me," she whispered, her voice eerily calm. "What do you mean?" I urged, panic flooding my chest. "They've already chosen me." In that moment, I felt a cold hand on my shoulder. I turned to find nothing there. But I could see her smiling, and it wasn't a smile of relief. It was something darker, something that twisted my insides. "Leave me," she said, her voice shifting, growing deeper, more distorted. "You don't want to be here." I stumbled back, fear tightening my throat. I turned to run, but the shadows engulfed me, pulling me into the darkness. I could hear her laughter echoing in the night, mingling with the sound of the wind. I don't know how long I ran, but when I finally reached my cabin, I locked the door, my hands shaking. I collapsed against the wall, trying to catch my breath. The call, the voice, the figures, they haunted my mind. As dawn broke, I glanced outside, half expecting to see her or them, but the forest was empty, as if nothing had happened. Just another quiet morning in the middle of nowhere. I picked up my phone to call the authorities to report what I had experienced. But when I looked down, the screen was cracked. There was no signal. Just then, it buzzed again, another unknown number. My heart raced as I answered, "Hello." A familiar voice whispered back, "Help me." The Watcher. The town I grew up in was small, nestled between endless fields and dense woods. As a kid, I often played in those woods, blissfully unaware of the stories that surrounded them. They say you shouldn't venture too far alone, but I was never one to heed warnings. One late afternoon, after a long day of wandering, I found myself deeper in the woods than usual. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows that danced between the trees. I felt a twinge of unease, but brushed it off as just the fading light playing tricks on me. As I walked, I noticed something unusual, a small, weathered cabin partially hidden by vines and overgrowth. Curiosity got the best of me. I approached, brushing away the leaves. The door creaked open, revealing a dim interior filled with dust and old furniture. Inside, I found remnants of a life once lived, faded photographs, old books, and a small, rusted mirror. I stared into it, wiping away the dust. My reflection looked back, but there was something strange about it, something just off. I shook my head, convinced it was the dim light. Suddenly, I heard a noise behind me. A rustle, then silence. I turned around, heart pounding, but found nothing. Maybe it was just a bird, I thought, trying to convince myself. I took a deep breath and stepped outside again, but as I turned, I felt it, eyes on me. I scanned the tree line, but nothing moved. The feeling only grew stronger, as if someone or something was watching me. With an uneasy feeling settling in my stomach, I decided to head home. As I walked, the feeling of being followed intensified. Each snap of a twig made me jump. I glanced back repeatedly, half expecting to see a figure standing just out of sight. When I finally reached the edge of the woods, I sprinted home, bursting through the door and locking it behind me. My heart raced as I leaned against the door, trying to shake off the dread that clung to me. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house sounded like footsteps. Every gust of wind felt like a breath on my neck. I finally mustered the courage to look out the window, heart hammering in my chest. And there, at the tree line, stood a figure, a silhouette against the fading moonlight. I couldn't see its face, but I felt its gaze piercing through the darkness. I stumbled back, heart racing, but when I looked again, it was gone. The next day, I told my friend Jake about it. He laughed it off as my imagination. "You're just being paranoid," he said. But when I insisted we go back to the cabin, he agreed, albeit reluctantly. We arrived at the cabin, and I felt that familiar chill run down my spine. Jake explored while I stood outside, scanning the tree line, expecting to see that figure again. After a few minutes, I decided to step inside. "Dude, you have to see this," Jake called, his voice echoing in the empty cabin. I found him in the back room, pointing at something on the floor. It was an old journal, pages yellowed and frayed. "Read this," he urged. I flipped through it, skimming the entries until one caught my eye. It was dated years ago, and it detailed the writer's growing paranoia about being watched. Each entry grew more frantic, describing shadowy figures lurking just out of sight. The last entry was chilling. "I see him watching me. He won't stop until I'm his." A chill crawled up my spine. I looked up at Jake, who seemed oblivious, still flipping through the pages. I felt that familiar sensation again, the feeling of being watched. "Let's get out of here," I urged. As we stepped outside, the sun dipped low, casting long shadows. Jake laughed, trying to lighten the mood, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Suddenly, a cold breeze swept through the trees, and I heard a whisper, faint yet unmistakable. "Stay with me." We both froze. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Jake looked at me, confusion etched on his face. "Hear what?" "Let's go." I insisted, and we hurried back toward the path. But as we reached the tree line, I glanced back at the cabin one last time. And there it was, a figure standing just outside the door, its features obscured by shadows. It felt like it was smiling, a twisted grin that sent shivers down my spine. We ran, not stopping until we reached my house. I locked the door behind us, breathless and terrified. The feeling of being watched persisted, gnawing at the edges of my mind. That night, I dreamt of the figure, its eyes cold and unyielding, watching me as I slept. When I woke, the sun had just risen, and I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe it was just a nightmare. But as I stepped outside to greet the day, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Footprints in the dirt leading to my front porch, small yet unmistakable. I stepped back, dread settling in my gut. I turned to run back inside, but froze as I heard that whisper again, soft yet clear. "Stay with me." The forgotten ones. I'd always loved the quiet of rural life. My grandparents had a small farmhouse far from the nearest town, surrounded by rolling hills and dense forests. It was my escape, a place to unwind during summer breaks. But this year felt different. As I arrived, the air was heavy with an unshakable tension. My grandparents were unusually quiet, their eyes darting toward the windows as if expecting someone or something. I shrugged it off, convincing myself it was just old age catching up with them. On my first night, I noticed the basement door slightly ajar. My curiosity piqued, I descended the creaking stairs. The basement was dimly lit, filled with cobwebs and dusty old boxes. Among the clutter, I found an old trunk. As I opened it, the smell of mildew wafted up, but I felt drawn to it. Inside were faded photographs, each one depicting a family I didn't recognize. I sifted through them, trying to piece together their story. A chill ran down my spine when I noticed a recurring theme. In every photo, there were two figures standing in the background, dark silhouettes with indistinct features. They seemed to be watching the family, a sinister presence lurking in every frame. "Hey, what are you doing down there?" My grandmother's voice startled me, and I quickly shut the trunk. "I found some old photos," I replied, trying to sound casual. "Who are these people?" She hesitated, her face paling. "Just some old friends, long gone." That night, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. I lay in bed, listening to the soft creaks of the house, but it wasn't the house that unsettled me. It was that lingering sensation of being watched. The next day, I decided to explore the woods behind the house. I remembered the stories of old, tales my grandparents shared about the families who once lived here. They said the land had a history, one of loss and despair. I laughed it off as folklore, but deep down, I felt a pull to uncover the truth. As I wandered deeper into the trees, I stumbled upon an overgrown path. The air grew colder, and I felt an odd sensation, as if the very trees were alive and watching me. I followed the path, pushing through the underbrush until I found a clearing. In the center stood an old, crumbling gravestone, its inscription barely legible. It read, "In memory of the forgotten ones." My heart raced as I knelt to examine it. I'd never heard of any forgotten family buried here. As I brushed away the dirt, a chill crept down my spine. I felt a presence behind me, and when I turned, I saw them, two figures standing at the edge of the clearing, watching me with hollow eyes. I bolted back toward the house, the feeling of dread overwhelming me. I burst through the front door, breathless and wide-eyed. "Did you know there's a grave out there?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. My grandmother looked at me, her face drained of color. "We thought they were gone, forgotten." "What do you mean?" I pressed, desperate for answers. "They were a family that lived here before us. They disappeared one night, and no one knows what happened to them. We never went looking. We thought it best to leave it alone." That night, I was jolted awake by a loud thump coming from the basement. My heart raced as I got out of bed, feeling the weight of dread pressing down on me. I crept down the hallway, the floorboards creaking under my weight. As I reached the basement door, I heard whispers, low and urgent. I hesitated, fear clawing at my throat, but the need to know drove me forward. I opened the door and descended the stairs. The whispers grew louder, echoing off the walls. "Help us! Help us!" In the corner of the room, I saw the trunk slightly ajar. I approached cautiously, heart pounding in my chest. The photographs lay scattered across the floor, but they were different now, distorted, the faces twisted in agony. Suddenly, the temperature dropped, and I felt a cold breath on my neck. I turned around to find the two figures standing behind me, their faces now clearer. They were gaunt, hollow-eyed mouths twisted in silent screams. "Help us! Find peace!" they whispered in unison, their voices echoing in my mind. I stumbled back, terror overwhelming me. I sprinted up the stairs, slamming the door behind me. I couldn't sleep that night, every creak of the house reminding me of their presence. The next day, I decided to confront my grandparents. I'd gathered them in the living room, the weight of what I'd seen heavy on my chest. "I want to help them," I said, determination edging my voice. My grandmother looked at me, tears brimming in her eyes. "You can't. It's too late for them. We've tried." "Then we have to try again," I insisted. With their reluctant agreement, we gathered candles and matches, heading back to the clearing that evening. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the air thickened with tension, the shadows beneath. When I moved into the old farmhouse, I thought I was escaping the chaos of city life. The charming creaks and groans of the building felt like a welcome embrace, and the isolation promised peace. But after the first week, I realized the house had its own secrets. One night, while unpacking in the dim light of my living room, I noticed a trapdoor in the corner, partially hidden by an old rug. I hesitated. My curiosity won out, and I pried it open, revealing a narrow staircase that descended into darkness. As I descended, the air grew cold and stale. I flicked on my flashlight, illuminating the cramped space. The walls were lined with dirt, and the smell of damp earth filled my lungs. I reached the bottom and found myself in a small cellar. In the dim light, I spotted a few dusty jars on a rickety shelf and what looked like a pile of old clothes in the corner. A shiver ran down my spine as I scanned the room. Something felt wrong. I decided to leave, but just as I turned to go, I heard it, a soft rustle behind me. I spun around, flashlight beam darting across the room, but nothing was there. I shook my head, brushing it off as my imagination. Climbing back up the stairs, I felt a lingering sensation as if someone or something was watching me from the shadows. Over the next few nights, I began to hear strange noises, whispers that drifted through the air like a conversation just out of reach. I chalked it up to the old house settling, but the sound gnawed at my sanity. One evening, after a long day of unpacking, I decided to investigate the cellar again. Armed with my flashlight and a sense of dread, I descended the stairs once more. As I stepped into the cellar, I felt a wave of cold wash over me. "Hello," I called, my voice echoing in the confined space. The air felt heavy, charged with an unspoken tension. I scanned the room, my heart beat loud in my ears. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. I swung my flashlight in that direction and froze. There, in the shadows, stood a figure, a child, no older than 10, with dark hair and wide, hollow eyes. My breath caught in my throat. "Help me," the child whispered, voice barely audible, filled with desperation. "Who are you?" I asked, fear creeping in. But the child didn't respond. Instead, they pointed toward the far wall, where I noticed something I hadn't seen before, a small door, half hidden by dust and cobwebs. "Please," the child urged, stepping closer, their face a mixture of fear and longing. I was terrified, yet compelled to know more. I approached the door, my heart racing. "What's in there?" The child opened their mouth to speak, but before they could say anything, a loud bang echoed through the cellar, making me jump. I turned to see the jars rattling on the shelf. When I looked back, the child was gone, as if they had never been there. Panic surged within me. I rushed up the stairs, slamming the trapdoor shut behind me. I sat on the floor, gasping for breath, trying to process what had just happened. Was it a figment of my imagination? A dream? That night, I barely slept, haunted by the child's desperate plea. The next day, I resolved to find out what was behind that door. Armed with a crowbar, I returned to the cellar. As I pried the door open, an overwhelming sense of dread washed over me. The room beyond was dark, and the air felt suffocating. I shone my flashlight inside and gasped. The walls were covered in drawings, crude sketches of the child, scenes of fear and darkness. In the center of the room lay a pile of old toys, all broken and discarded. Suddenly, I heard laughter, a chilling, echoing laughter that seemed to swirl around me. My skin crawled as I realized it wasn't just the child. There were others, more shadows lurking just out of sight. "Join us," the voices sang, beckoning me deeper into the room. My instincts screamed at me to run, but I felt a pull, a need to help. "What happened to you?" I shouted, hoping for answers. The laughter faded, replaced by whispers, a chorus of voices overlapping, filling the air with their sorrow. "We can't leave." I turned to flee, but the door slammed shut behind me. Panic surged as I pounded on it, desperate to escape. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of anguish. "Stay with us." In a moment of clarity, I remembered the old tales, the ones about the children who went missing in these woods, their spirits trapped, unable to move on. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. They needed help, but I was just one person. With renewed determination, I focused on the drawings, searching for a clue. In the corner, I noticed a symbol, a crude drawing of a tree. It looked familiar. I recalled a large tree outside, one that seemed to loom over the property. The whispers intensified, growing frantic. I knew I had to get to that tree. In a burst of adrenaline, I charged toward the door, throwing my weight against it until it finally creaked open. The mirror's reflection. When I inherited my grandmother's old house, I was excited to spend the summer there, away from the hustle and bustle of city life. The place was charming, filled with vintage furniture and dusty knickknacks, but one thing caught my eye: the enormous ornate mirror in the hallway. It was beautiful, its frame intricately carved with swirling patterns, but something about it felt off. On my first night, I noticed how the mirror seemed to distort the reflection of the hallway, the edges warping like a funhouse mirror. I shook it off as a trick of the light and went to bed. As the nights wore on, however, I started to hear strange noises, soft whispers that seemed to echo from the mirror. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, drawn to it as if it were calling my name. Each time I approached, the whispers grew louder, more urgent, but I could never make out the words. One evening, unable to resist, I decided to investigate. I stood before the mirror, heart racing. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The whispers fell silent, and for a moment, I thought I was imagining things. But then the surface of the mirror shimmered, and I felt a cold breeze sweep through the hallway. Suddenly, my reflection shifted. Instead of my own face, I saw a young girl, her eyes wide with fear. She looked familiar, like a photo I'd seen of my grandmother as a child. "Help me," she whispered, her voice trembling. I stepped back, startled. "Who are you?" I demanded. But the girl only pointed toward the mirror's surface, her expression desperate. That night, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned, haunted by the girl's pleading eyes. The next morning, I found an old photo album tucked away in a dusty corner of the living room. Flipping through it, I stumbled upon the same girl, my grandmother as a child, standing in front of the very mirror that now consumed my thoughts. I felt a chill wash over me. "What happened to you?" I whispered, my heart racing. The photo had a date scribbled on the back, 1934. Determined to uncover the truth, I scoured the house for more clues. In the attic, I found an old trunk filled with letters and journals. As I read through them, a disturbing pattern emerged. My grandmother had often written about strange occurrences surrounding the mirror, objects moving, shadows lurking, and whispers echoing in the night. In the final entry, she wrote about feeling trapped, as if the mirror was pulling her in. That night, I returned to the mirror, the weight of my discoveries pressing down on me. "What happened to you?" I asked again, my voice steadier now. The girl appeared once more, her reflection flickering. "Help me," she urged again, and in that moment, I felt an overwhelming sense of compassion. I needed to free her. I remembered the trunk in the attic, particularly a note that mentioned a family secret, something to do with the mirror's origins. I rushed back upstairs and found the note. It spoke of a curse placed on the mirror, a dark history involving betrayal and loss. According to the note, the only way to break the curse was to confront the darkness that lingered within. I made my way back to the mirror, heart pounding. "I'm here to help you," I shouted, desperation creeping into my voice. "What do I need to do?" The girl's reflection twisted, her eyes pleading. "Face the darkness." The room darkened around me, the whispers rising in intensity. Shadows danced in the corners, pulling at the edges of my vision. I felt an overwhelming presence, cold and malevolent. "Show yourself," I shouted, my voice echoing against the walls. The surface of the mirror rippled violently, and from the depths emerged a dark figure, its features obscured by shadows. It was a grotesque silhouette, eyes burning with malice. I stumbled back, fear coursing through me. But then I saw the girl, trapped within the reflection, her face filled with determination. "You can do this," she urged, her voice stronger now. Gathering my courage, I stepped forward. "I'm not afraid of you," I shouted, the words feeling powerful. The dark figure lunged, but I held my ground, focusing on the light I could feel growing within me. "Leave her alone," I cried, and with that, I reached out toward the mirror. My hand met the surface, and I felt a rush of energy surging through me. The darkness screamed, the sound echoing around the room, but I pressed on, drawing strength from the girl's presence. I envisioned the light engulfing the darkness, banishing it to the depths from which it had come. The figure writhed, shadows clawing at the edges of the mirror, and finally, with one last shriek, it shattered like glass, a blinding light exploding outward. When I opened my eyes, I found myself standing in front of the mirror, my reflection normal again. The oppressive weight that had filled the room was gone, and in its place, I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced before. The last train. I had always been a night owl, drawn to the stillness of the world after dark. It was during one of those sleepless nights that I decided to take a walk to the old train station at the edge of town. Rumor had it that the station was haunted, a relic from a bygone era when trains still carried people across the countryside. Most dismissed it as folklore, but I was intrigued. The night air was thick with fog as I approached the dilapidated building. The once vibrant paint was peeling, and the tracks were overgrown with weeds. As I stepped inside, the floorboards creaked beneath my weight, sending shivers up my spine. I wandered through the empty waiting room, my flashlight beam flickering across the dusty benches and faded posters. It felt like stepping into a time capsule, frozen in a moment when people eagerly awaited their journeys. But the silence was deafening, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. As I explored deeper, I heard it, the distant sound of a train whistle. It echoed through the night, a haunting melody that sent chills down my spine. I froze, straining to listen. It was impossible. The tracks hadn't seen a train in years. Curiosity piqued. I made my way outside, following the sound. The fog swelled around me, thickening with each step, obscuring my vision. I approached the tracks just as I saw a faint light in the distance, like the headlight of an approaching train. I stood there, heart racing, as the light grew closer. The whistle sounded again, more urgent this time. My instincts screamed at me to run, but something held me in place. I watched in awe as a ghostly train emerged from the fog, its ancient cars shimmering as if made of mist. It slowed to a stop right in front of me, the engine hissing softly. The door of one of the cars creaked open, and I felt a strange pull, as if the train were inviting me aboard. Against my better judgment, I stepped closer. The interior was dimly lit, the air thick with the scent of tobacco and something else, something sour. As I entered, I was greeted by the sight of passengers seated at the tables, their faces obscured by shadows. They wore old-fashioned clothing, as if they had stepped out of a different time. Chill ran down my spine, but I pressed on, drawn to the only empty seat at the far end. As I sat down, the passengers turned to look at me, their expressions a mix of curiosity and something darker. "Where are we going?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. One of them, a woman with hollow cheeks and sunken eyes, leaned closer. "To the last stop," she whispered, her voice raspy, "where the lost souls dwell." The train lurched forward, and the scenery outside morphed into a blur. The laughter and chatter of the passengers echoed in my ears, but I felt a growing sense of unease. I noticed that their eyes seemed to glimmer in the low light, but their smiles were unsettling, too wide, too knowing. "Are you lost?" the woman asked, her eyes boring into mine. I don't think so," I stammered, glancing at the other passengers. Their expressions were almost predatory, and I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. The train continued to speed through the fog, and I could feel the tension in the air thickening. "You shouldn't be here," another passenger said, a man with a slicked-back hairstyle. "Not unless you're ready to stay." Panic surged within me. Stay? I don't want to stay. I want to go home. The laughter that erupted from the other passengers was cold and hollow. The woman leaned closer, her smile widening. "There's no going back once you board this train." I bolted from my seat, but the train began to shake violently, the lights flickering. I stumbled down the aisle, desperate to escape. "Let me off." I shouted, but the laughter grew louder, drowning out my cries. As I reached the door, I realized it was locked. The figures closed in around me, their faces twisting in delight. "You're ours now," they chorused, their voices blending into a horrific symphony. In a last-ditch effort, I turned and hurled myself against the door. It swung open, and I stumbled out into the fog. The world outside was dark and still, the train disappearing into the mist behind me. I ran down the tracks, the laughter of the passengers echoing in my mind. The fog clung to me like a shroud, and I felt a pull, urging me to turn back. But I pushed forward, adrenaline driving me. Finally, I emerged from the fog, breathless and disoriented, back at the station. The train station stood silent, the only sound my ragged breathing. I looked back at the tracks, heart racing. The train was gone, as if it had never been there. As I stumbled away from the station, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had escaped something dark, something that would haunt me forever. But late at night, when the world grew quiet, I sometimes heard the distant whistle of a train, a reminder that some journeys are never truly over. The Whispering Pines. I decided to take a weekend trip to a remote cabin my friend had raved about. Tucked away in the heart of a dense forest, It was the perfect escape from the chaos of everyday life. When I arrived, I was captivated by the beauty of the towering pines and the stillness of the air. But as the sun began to set, an unsettling feeling settled in my stomach. That first evening, I noticed something strange. The wind whistled through the trees, but it wasn't just the sound of wind. I could have sworn I heard whispers, soft and indistinct, like a conversation just out of earshot. I shook it off, convincing myself it was just my imagination. The next day, I decided to explore the surrounding woods. As I wandered deeper into the forest, the whispering grew louder, almost beckoning me. I stopped and closed my eyes, straining to listen. It sounded like my name being called, but in a voice I didn't recognize. "Sarah, Sarah," it called, echoing through the trees. "Hello." I called back, my voice trembling slightly. Silence enveloped me, and for a moment, I felt foolish for responding. I shrugged it off and continued my hike, the whispers fading behind me. That night, I sat on the porch of the cabin, watching the stars twinkle above. But the tranquility was shattered when the whispers returned, louder than before, swirling around me like a chilling breeze. They felt more insistent now, almost urgent. "Help us." I froze, heart racing. I strained to make sense of the words, but all I could hear were those two haunting syllables repeated over and over. I felt drawn to the forest, an inexplicable pull urging me to go deeper into the trees. As I stood up, I noticed a path that I hadn't seen before, overgrown with brambles but clearly defined. Against my better judgment, I decided to follow it, the whispers guiding me further into the darkness. The path led me to a clearing, illuminated by the pale light of the moon. In the center stood an old, weathered tree, its trunk twisted and gnarled. The whispers intensified, swirling around me like a storm. I approached the tree, feeling an odd energy radiating from it. "Help us," the voices pleaded, now more distinct. I could make out words, fragments of stories filled with sorrow and longing. I placed my hand on the tree, and an icy chill shot through me. Images flooded my mind. Children playing in the forest, laughter echoing, followed by screams and shadows. A feeling of despair enveloped me, and I stumbled back, gasping for breath. Suddenly, I heard the sound of rustling leaves behind me. I spun around, my heart pounding. In the shadows stood figures, pale and ghostly, their faces twisted in anguish. I recognized them from the images that had flashed through my mind. Children, lost and alone. "Help us," they repeated, their voices a haunting chorus. "We can't leave." I felt tears prick at my eyes. "What happened to you?" I cried, desperation clawing at me. The figures began to fade, but one girl stepped forward, her eyes filled with sorrow. "We played too close to the trees. The forest took us. We can't find our way home." I could feel their pain, their longing for freedom. "How can I help you?" I asked, voice trembling. "The tree," she whispered, pointing to the gnarled trunk. "Free us." I nodded, determination flooding through me. I could feel the weight of their sorrow pressing down on me, and I knew I had to act. I placed my hands on the tree again, closing my eyes, willing all my strength into it. "Let them go," I shouted, my voice breaking. They deserved to be free. The wind howled, and the tree trembled beneath my touch. The whispers grew frantic, swirling around me, urging me to release them. I felt the energy building, a warmth spreading from my hands into the trunk. Suddenly, a blinding light erupted from the tree, illuminating the clearing. The children's figures began to shimmer, their expressions transforming from despair to relief. "Thank you," they whispered in unison, voices now filled with joy. With that, they vanished into the light, and the air grew still. The whispers faded, replaced by the gentle rustle of leaves in the wind. I opened my eyes, tears streaming down my cheeks, feeling a profound sense of peace wash over me. I made my way back to the cabin, the forest now alive with the sounds of nature. The oppressive weight that had lingered was gone, and the whispers that had haunted me were now a distant memory. As I settled in for the night, I realized that sometimes the past must be acknowledged and released for the living to find peace. I would carry that night with me forever, a reminder of the power of compassion and the freedom that comes from letting go. The last gift. It was my grandmother's birthday when I received the strange package. I was cleaning out the attic of my childhood home, getting it ready for sale, when I stumbled upon a dusty box addressed to her. It was old, the paper yellowed with age, but the name was unmistakable: to my beloved Clara. Curiosity piqued, I carefully opened the box. Inside lay a delicate music box, intricately carved with floral patterns. As I lifted it, a chill coursed through me. It felt heavy in my hands, as if it were burdened with memories. I wound the key and opened the lid. The soft, haunting melody filled the room, and I felt an odd sense of nostalgia wash over me. It was a lullaby my grandmother used to sing when I was a child. As the music played, shadows danced around the attic, the flickering light casting eerie shapes against the walls. Suddenly, I noticed a small note tucked inside the box. It read, "For the one who can see." I frowned, feeling a shiver run down my spine. What did that mean? That evening, as I sat in the living room, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The shadows seemed to linger longer, creeping along the walls. I decided to play the music box again, hoping it would bring some comfort. As the melody filled the air, I felt a presence beside me. I glanced over and gasped. There, in the corner of the room, stood a figure, a woman in a flowing white dress, her face obscured by dark hair. My heart raced, but I felt an inexplicable pull to her. "Clara," she whispered, her voice soft but filled with urgency. "What do you want?" I managed to stammer, frozen in place. "I've been waiting," she replied, stepping closer. "The music box is a gift, but it holds a deeper meaning. It can help you remember what was lost." Before I could respond, the room darkened and the shadows closed in around us. I felt the air grow thick and oppressive, and the music from the box began to change. The lullaby morphed into a discordant tune filled with sorrow. "Remember," the figure cried, her voice echoing. "You must remember." Images flooded my mind, memories of my grandmother, but they were tainted with something darker. I saw her standing by the window, gazing out with tears in her eyes, whispering to someone I couldn't see. A sense of dread washed over me. "Who were you talking to?" I shouted, trying to break free from the grasp of the shadows. "What happened to you?" The figure reached out, her hand trembling. "I need you to listen. It was a mistake, a pact I made to protect you, but it came at a price." Suddenly, I felt a jolt of pain in my chest, and the shadows lunged toward me. I struggled against them, but the grip was unyielding. "You have to break the pact," she urged, desperation etched across her features. "You must choose." "What choice?" I cried, panic rising within me. "Let go of the past or lose everything," she whispered, and in that moment I understood. The music box was a conduit, a link between the living and the lost. I had to confront the darkness that had been haunting my family. Gathering my courage, I closed my eyes and focused on the music, letting it wash over me. I reached for the light within, pushing against the shadows. "I release you," I shouted, the words tearing from my throat. The shadows shrieked, swirling violently around me. I could feel the presence of the figure growing stronger, her voice merging with the melody. "Break the cycle. Set us free." With one final surge of energy, I threw open the music box, unleashing a brilliant light that flooded the room. The shadows recoiled, and the figure stood before me, her face softening. "Thank you," she said, tears of gratitude glistening in her eyes. "You've given us a chance to find peace." As the light enveloped her, the room filled with warmth. The oppressive weight lifted, and the music shifted back to the soft lullaby. The figure smiled one last time before vanishing into the light, leaving behind a sense of serenity. I fell to my knees, gasping for breath, the music box still playing gently beside me. The shadows were gone, replaced by a calm stillness. I realized that I had not only freed her, but also released my grandmother from the burdens she had carried for so long. From that day on, the music box held a different meaning. It was a reminder of the love that transcended time and space, a gift that would forever connect me to my grandmother and the sacrifices she made. As I left the attic that day, I felt lighter, knowing I had broken the cycle of pain and opened a door to healing. The Forgotten Cabin. During a solo hiking trip in the woods, I stumbled upon an old forgotten cabin. It was hidden behind thick underbrush, its once vibrant paint peeling and the windows boarded up. My curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to investigate. As I pushed the door open, it creaked ominously, revealing a dark, musty interior. Dust motes danced in the faint light that filtered through the cracks. The air felt thick, heavy with the scent of mildew and something else. something I couldn't quite place. I stepped inside, my flashlight beam illuminating the remnants of what was once a cozy space, a stone fireplace, a table with chairs long abandoned, and an old, moth-eaten couch. But what caught my attention was a large, ornate mirror hanging on the far wall. Its surface was tarnished, reflecting distorted images of the cabin. Compelled, I approached the mirror. As I did, I noticed the faint outline of a figure behind me, but when I turned, there was nothing there. I shook my head, dismissing it as a trick of the light. I reached out to touch the mirror, feeling a chill radiate from its surface. Just then, the air around me shifted, and a soft whisper floated through the room. "Help me." I froze, the voice both eerie and desperate. "Who's there?" I called out, my heart racing. But the room was silent, the only sound the creaking of the old wood. Feeling a mix of fear and intrigue, I studied the mirror closely. In its depths, I could see fleeting images. A woman with long hair, her face twisted in anguish, and then a flash of children playing, laughter ringing out. The images flickered in and out, like echoes of a distant past. I stepped back, unsettled, but the whispering returned, growing louder, more insistent. "Help me, please." Compelled to understand, I decided to search the cabin for clues. I rummaged through drawers, finding dusty old letters and photographs, but nothing that provided answers. Then I stumbled upon a diary hidden beneath a floorboard. Its pages were yellowed and fragile, but I could still make out the words. As I read, I uncovered a tragic tale. A woman named Eliza, who had lived in the cabin long ago. She wrote of her joy when her children played nearby, but the happiness soon turned to despair when they vanished into the woods. Desperate to find them, she had become consumed by grief, ultimately disappearing herself. The final entry sent chills down my spine. I can still hear their laughter in the mirror. I see their faces, but I cannot reach them. If anyone finds this, I beg you, help me. Suddenly, the cabin felt colder, and the whispering intensified. I turned to the mirror, and to my horror, I saw the figure of Eliza standing behind me, her face pale and gaunt, eyes filled with sorrow. "You can help me," she implored, her voice echoing in the small space. "What do you need?" I stammered, fear clawing at my throat. "Find them. They are lost," she urged, pointing toward the mirror. "I can't rest until they are free." The shadows in the mirror shifted, and I caught a glimpse of the children, their faces twisted in fear, trapped within its depths. I felt a surge of compassion and determination. "I'll help you," I promised, my voice steadier than I felt. Eliza's expression softened, and she nodded. "You must confront the darkness. Only then can they be released." Taking a deep breath, I focused on the mirror, willing myself to see beyond its surface. The air crackled with energy, and the whispers became a cacophony of voices, pleading and mournful. "Help us! Help us!" they cried. I placed my hands on the mirror and closed my eyes, drawing from the strength within me. "I will not let you suffer," I shouted, feeling the power of my resolve surge through me. Suddenly, the mirror began to ripple like water, and I was pulled into its depths. I found myself in a dark void, surrounded by shadows. The voices grew louder, swirling around me, tugging at my consciousness. But I focused on the images of the children, holding onto their laughter like a lifeline. "Find the light," Eliza's voice echoed, guiding me through the darkness. I pushed forward, feeling the weight of despair trying to drag me down. I reached out, searching for the source of the laughter. In the distance, I saw flickering lights, dancing like fireflies. I sprinted toward them, breaking through the shadows. As I reached the light, I found the children, lost but not broken, their eyes wide with hope. "Follow me," I urged, and they began to gather around me, their smiles illuminating the darkness. As we moved toward the light, I could feel the shadows clawing at my back, trying to pull me away. "Stay together," I shouted, and we pressed on, the warmth of the light growing stronger. With one final push, we burst through into a beautiful meadow, sunlight pouring over us. The children laughed and danced, free at last. Eliza appeared beside me, her face radiant with relief. "Thank you," whispered the shadow beneath. "Last summer, I took a trip to a remote seaside town, hoping for some peace and quiet. The town was charming, but there was an unsettling aura about it. The locals were friendly enough, but they often cast furtive glances toward the cliffs that loomed above the shore. One evening, I decided to take a walk along the beach. The sun was setting, casting an orange glow over the waves, and the sound of the surf was calming. As I strolled, I noticed a path winding up the cliffs, partially hidden by overgrown grass. Intrigued, I decided to follow it. The path was steep and winding, but I felt compelled to reach the top. When I finally emerged from the thicket, I found myself at a stunning overlook, the view breathtaking. But something else caught my eye, a dark, jagged rock formation jutting out from the cliffside, almost like a natural throne. As I approached the formation, I felt an odd chill, despite the warmth of the evening. There was an unsettling energy in the air, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I glanced back toward the path, but no one was in sight. Suddenly, I heard a soft whisper, almost carried by the wind. "Help me." The voice was faint, but it sent a shiver down my spine. "Who's there?" I called out, but the only response was the crashing waves below. My heart raced, but curiosity pulled me closer to the rock formation. As I reached it, I noticed strange markings etched into the stone, swirling patterns that seemed almost alive. I traced my fingers over the carvings, and the whispering grew louder. "Help me, please." I stepped back, my breath quickening. "What do you want?" I shouted, feeling a mixture of fear and determination. Suddenly, shadows began to twist and flicker around the rock. The air grew colder, and I could see a figure forming within the darkness, a woman, her face twisted in anguish, her eyes hollow and pleading. "I am trapped," she said, her voice echoing like a distant memory. "I need your help to break free." "Trapped? How?" I managed to ask, unable to look away from her tortured expression. "A pact was made," she whispered, her form flickering like a candle in the wind. "A sacrifice for power. I was chosen, and now I am bound to this place." My mind raced. I remembered the whispers from the townsfolk, their wary glances. "What do I need to do?" I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. "Find the heart of the cliff. There lies the key to my freedom," she urged, her voice a mix of hope and despair. I hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "I'll help you. Just tell me where to go." "The path leads deeper into the shadows. Trust your heart and you will find it," she instructed, her figure becoming more translucent. Taking a deep breath, I turned away from the rock and ventured further along the cliff. The path twisted and narrowed, engulfed in thick shadows. The whispers followed me, growing louder with each step, echoing with the voices of countless souls. "Don't turn back," they urged. "Keep going." As I walked, I could feel the temperature drop, and an overwhelming sense of dread settled in. The shadows seemed to reach out for me, clinging to my skin, but I pressed on, determined to find the heart. Finally, I reached a small cave hidden beneath the overhang. The entrance was shrouded in darkness, but the whispers urged me inside. I stepped into the cave, and the air felt heavy, charged with an ancient energy. At the center of the cave lay a pulsating stone, glowing with an eerie light. It was unlike anything I had ever seen, a heart of shadows and light intertwined. As I approached, the shadows grew restless, swirling around the stone like a tempest. "Touch it," the voices cried. "Release her." With trembling hands, I reached out and pressed my palm against the stone. A jolt of energy surged through me, filling my veins with a mix of fear and exhilaration. The shadows coiled tighter around me, and I could feel the figure of the woman at the rock formation merging with my essence. "Free me," she screamed, her voice piercing through the chaos. I concentrated, channeling every ounce of strength I had. "I release you from this pact," I shouted, forcing the words from my throat. "You are free." In that moment, the shadows erupted, swirling violently around the cave. I felt a surge of energy ripple through me, as if a dam had broken. Light burst forth, blinding and intense, and I braced myself against the force. Then silence. As my vision cleared, I found myself back at the rock formation, the shadows now dissipated into the air. The woman stood before me, radiant and free. "Thank you," she said, her voice now full of warmth. "You have broken the curse." I fell to my knees, relief flooding over me. The oppressive weight that had lingered was gone, and the whispers faded into the night. The woman smiled, her form shimmering like the evening stars. "You are a brave soul." Remember, light can always triumph over darkness. The Cabin of Echoes. It was supposed to be a weekend getaway, a chance to unwind in nature. My friends and I rented a cabin deep in the woods, far from cell service and the distractions of the city. The cabin was rustic, charming even, but the air felt heavy with an unshakable tension. On the first night, we gathered around the fire pit, laughter and stories filling the air. As the stars twinkled above, I couldn't help but notice the dense trees surrounding us, their branches twisting like gnarled fingers reaching toward the sky. Later, after everyone had gone to bed, I found myself unable to sleep. I stepped outside for some fresh air, the cool night wrapping around me like a blanket. The forest was alive with sounds, the rustling of leaves, distant animal calls, but something else lingered beneath it all. A low hum that sent a chill down my spine. I wandered away from the cabin, drawn by the unsettling melody. It grew louder, echoing through the trees. I followed it deeper into the woods, the path becoming less defined. The moonlight flickered through the branches, casting eerie shadows. Suddenly, I stumbled upon another cabin, older and more dilapidated than ours. The door creaked open, and I hesitated. The hum was strongest here, a siren call beckoning me inside. Against my better judgment, I stepped over the threshold. Inside, the air was thick with dust, and the walls were lined with strange markings, symbols that seemed to pulsate with energy. In the center of the room stood a large mirror, its surface dark and murky, reflecting nothing but shadows. As I approached the mirror, the hum turned into whispers, soft and beckoning. Come closer, see what lies within. I felt an inexplicable urge to touch it, and I raised my hand, pressing my palm against the cool glass. In an instant, the room shifted. The whispers became a cacophony, swirling around me, drowning out my thoughts. I gasped as faces began to materialize in the mirror, twisted, anguished expressions of people long forgotten. They reached out as if pleading for release. "Help us!" They cried in unison, their voices echoing in my mind. Panic surged within me. "What happened to you?" I shouted, but the mirror only pulsed with their sorrowful energy. "Trapped, we were drawn here. Help us escape!" A woman's voice cried, her face etched with despair. I stumbled back, heart racing. I remembered the stories my friends had shared around the fire about the woods, tales of lost souls and those who had vanished without a trace. I had dismissed them as mere folklore, but standing here, I felt the weight of their truth. "I don't know how," I yelled, desperation clawing at me. "Find the heart of the forest," the woman whispered. "It holds the key." Just then, the whispers shifted, growing chaotic and frantic. The mirror darkened, shadows swirling violently. I felt an overwhelming urge to flee, but something kept me rooted in place. "Leave this place," the voices roared, a storm of panic. Summoning all my courage, I turned away from the mirror and sprinted out of the cabin. The night air hit me like a wall, and I stumbled into the woods, adrenaline coursing through my veins. I had to find the heart of the forest. I ran, branches scratching at my arms, the whispers following me, growing more desperate. "Help us! We are lost." Finally, I burst into a clearing, breathless and terrified. In the center stood an ancient tree, its gnarled roots sprawling across the ground, pulsating with energy. I felt a magnetic pull toward it, as if the very essence of the forest was calling me. "Please, let them go!" I shouted, reaching out to touch the trunk. I can't bear their suffering. As my fingers brushed the bark, a jolt of energy shot through me. The whispers crescendoed into a roar, and I closed my eyes, willing the forest to release them. "I release you from this pain," I cried. "Find peace." In that moment, the air crackled with energy. The ground shook, and the shadows erupted from the tree, swirling into a vortex of darkness. I felt a rush of wind as the whispers transformed into cries of gratitude. "Thank you, we are free." When the storm of shadows subsided, the clearing was silent. I opened my eyes, heart pounding. The faces in the mirror had vanished, replaced by a serene calm. The tree stood strong and still, its energy now a gentle hum. I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, a profound sense of peace washing over me. The forest no longer felt foreboding. Instead, it felt alive and vibrant, as if it had been rejuvenated. As I made my way back to the cabin, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had witnessed something extraordinary. The stories were true. There were echoes in the woods, whispers of those who had lost their way, and I had helped them find their freedom. When I returned to my friends, they were still asleep, oblivious to the night's haunting events. I curled up on my bed, heart still racing.